My husband had been in the United States for 5 years. 5 years telling me it was for us, for the children, for the future. And I believed him. I believed him every time he canceled his return. Every time he invented a new excuse. Every time he promised it wouldn't be much longer. Until a woman I barely knew sent me a message, and everything I thought my marriage was stopped existing in 3 lines. What I discovered after that, I didn't expect it, and neither will you. My name is Anika Sharma. I am 32 years old, and for 5 years of my life, I waited for a man who never truly intended to come back. When Rohan left for the United States, I was 27. Our son Arjun was 3 years old, and our daughter Priya had just turned 1. He left in March. I remember the month because it was hot in Delhi. That dry, heavy heat that gets into your clothes and your lungs. The whole family came to the airport. His mother, my mother, the children, me. A group of neighbors had come to see him off as if it were a celebration. Rohan was happy, smiling, full of that energy men have when they feel they are about to conquer something. I was happy too, I think. Or I convinced myself to be. He told me before going through security, "Anika, this is for us, for the children. In 2 years we'll be together again, but with more money and more stability." I hugged him. I believed him. And I let him go. The first few months were what one imagines. Video calls every night, him showing me his rented room in Houston, telling me what the job was like, how the Indian community there got together on weekends to eat together and not feel so alone. He said he missed me. He sent photos of supermarkets, traffic, buildings, small, ordinary things that felt precious to me because they came from him. The first year passed, then the second, and the explanations for not returning began to change shape. At first it was money. They hadn't saved enough yet. Expenses there were higher than expected. The flight during that season was too expensive. Then it was work. He had been promoted and couldn't take leave yet. He was on an important project. If he left, he'd lose the opportunity. Then came the documents. He was in the process of a visa change. If he left the country, it would complicate everything. Better to wait until the paperwork was sorted. I listened. I logged the reasons in my mind as if they were verified facts, and I repeated them whenever anyone asked. When is Rohan coming back? He's in a very complicated visa process. He can't leave yet. When is Rohan coming back? He was just promoted. It's not a good time to ask for leave. When is Rohan coming back? Soon. Any day now. That's what I said. Soon. Any day now. 5 years of any day now. What weighed on me most was not the loneliness, though the loneliness was real and constant. What weighed on me most was raising the children alone, without being able to say I was raising them alone. Because saying it would have meant admitting something I didn't want to admit, so I juggled with words. Your papa is working very hard for you. Your papa misses you so much. Your papa is coming soon. Arjun started asking fewer questions over time. That hurt me more than his questions had. Priya didn't remember Rohan well because she was very small when he left, and that hurt too, but in a different way. We lived in my mother-in-law's house. That was the arrangement when Rohan left. I would stay there with the children while he sent money, and as soon as possible, we would have our own home again. His mother was a good person. I won't say otherwise. But living in your mother-in-law's house when your husband is not there is a position that has no decent name. You are there as a permanent guest, but without the treatment of a guest. You must help with everything, endure the comments, smile when you don't feel like it, be grateful even when you are slowly dying inside. She said things without meaning to hurt me, I think. Things like, I hope Rohan finds there what he couldn't find here. Or, he was always very ambitious, you know that. Phrases I initially read as maternal pride, but which over time I began to hear differently. I began to hear in them a kind of distance, as if she knew something I didn't, and was quietly processing it aloud without saying it directly. But I didn't want to see that. I kept not wanting to see it. The turning point came when a woman named Deepa sent me a message on WhatsApp. I didn't know her well. We were acquaintances from the community, the kind of people one sees at weddings and birthday parties and greets warmly but without real closeness. She had been living in Houston for 3 years. Her message was short. It said something like, Hi Anika, how are you? I've been wanting to write to you for a while but didn't know how. There's something I think you should know. I read that message 3 times before replying. I felt something strange in my stomach, the way one feels when you know what's coming but your body hasn't fully processed it yet. I replied, "Yes, go ahead." She took 2 days to write back, 2 days during which I carried on with my normal life. I took the children to school, I cooked, I helped my mother-in-law with the shopping. I called Rohan one evening and we spoke about small things. He was in good spirits. He told me he had attended a Diwali festival organized by the Indian community in Houston, that it had been very nice, that there had been so many people. He didn't tell me who he had gone with. When Deepa wrote back, she told me this, that at that Diwali festival, Rohan had arrived accompanied by a woman, that it was not the first time people had seen them together, that in the Indian community in Houston, everyone knew them as a couple, that she herself had seen them at a restaurant weeks before, sitting together, talking with that ease you don't have with work colleagues or casual friends. Deepa told me she was very sorry, that she had hesitated a long time before writing, that she didn't want to interfere, but that if she were in my position, she would have wanted someone to tell her the truth. I closed the phone. I sat on the bed in my room, the room Rohan and I had shared when we were newlyweds, which was now only mine, but which I had never felt was fully mine. And I did not cry, not at that moment. Sometimes the greatest pain doesn't arrive with tears. It arrives with a kind of internal silence, as if something has switched off. I sat thinking about the Diwali festival, about how naturally Rohan had told me about it, about how I had listened with interest, asking for details, imagining him happy among people from our culture, feeling a little proud that even from so far away he maintained that connection to our roots. And all that time, she was there. I didn't know her name yet. I didn't know her face. I knew nothing about her. But she already existed in my life as a formless presence, something that had been there for who knows how long, occupying a place I thought was mine. That night I said nothing to anyone. I put the children to bed, made sure Arjun had done his homework, combed Priya's hair before tucking her in. And when the house fell silent, I sat in the kitchen with a glass of water and stared at the wall. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know how I would continue. I only knew that something had broken and that I could no longer ignore it. I spent almost a week without saying anything to Rohan. It wasn't a deliberate decision. I didn't sit down to make a plan or strategically decide what to do. I simply couldn't. Every time I tried to imagine the conversation, something inside me closed. It was like wanting to open a door knowing that on the other side was something that would hurt you and your body simply refuses. I continued with my routine, took the children to school, cooked, helped around the house, spoke with Rohan twice that week, normal calls, the kind where he talks about work and I ask about things that don't matter, and we both pretend everything is fine. I listened, I responded, I said goodbye with a "take care." I hung up and stared at the darkened screen for a long while. Meanwhile, I kept turning over what Deepa had told me. It ran through my mind at every hour, while washing the dishes, while waiting for the school bus, while trying to sleep and failing. I told myself maybe there was a misunderstanding, that people talk without knowing, that small communities abroad carry a lot of gossip and little real information, that Deepa had perhaps misread something completely innocent. But at the same time, something in how she had written it didn't sound like gossip. It sounded like someone who had hesitated a great deal, who didn't want to say it, who said it because she felt she had no other choice. One night, when the children were asleep and the house was quiet, I opened Rohan's Facebook profile. I hadn't checked it carefully in months. He didn't post much. The occasional food photo, a landscape, things without depth. But that night, I began looking at everything with different eyes. I began searching for details I had previously overlooked, and I found them. It wasn't difficult. When you start looking with doubt already installed, things appear on their own. In the photos from recent festivals, a woman had commented, always the same one, a name, Mira Kapoor. Her comments were short, normal, the kind anyone might leave, but they were on almost every recent post. And when I went to her profile, I saw something that chilled me completely. In her profile picture, she was smiling. She was a pretty woman, around 30, long dark hair, a kind face. And on her cover photo was an image from an event, a festival, colorful lights, people in traditional Indian clothes, music you could imagine even though it was only a photo. And in that photo, almost in the background, almost as if it weren't important, was Rohan, standing next to her. They weren't embracing, they weren't kissing. They were simply standing together talking, with the ease of two people who are exactly where they want to be. That image stayed with me for days. I wrote to Deepa again. I asked if she knew the woman's name. She replied the next day, Meera Kapoor. Originally from Pune, living in Houston for 4 years, working at a technology company, divorced with no children. And then Deepa added something I hadn't asked, but which she felt necessary to tell me, that in the community, several people assumed Rohan and Meera were living together. I read that and had to put the phone down on the table and breathe slowly for a moment. Living together. While I lived in his mother's house, raising his children alone, explaining to Arjun why his papa couldn't come yet, combing Priya's hair before bed, and wondering if we would all ever be together again. While I repeated his excuses as if they were verified truths. While I defended his name whenever someone hinted at something. He was living with another woman. I didn't call Rohan that night, or the next. When he called on the third day, I didn't answer. I sent him a short message saying I was busy, that we'd talk later. He replied with an okay and a heart emoji. A heart emoji. Something inside me closed completely when I saw that. I decided I needed to know more before speaking with him. I didn't want to confront him with assumptions. I wanted certainty. So over the following days, I did something that shames me to admit, but which I would do again if I were in the same situation. I began to search for information systematically. I went through everything I could find on social media. I asked a cousin who lived in the United States to discreetly ask around among her contacts. I spoke to another woman from the Houston community with whom I was closer than I was with Deepa. What I pieced together, fragment by fragment, over nearly 2 weeks, was this. Rohan and Meera Kapoor had been together for approximately 3 years. They had met at an Indian community event in Houston shortly after he arrived. At first, it was friendship, according to what people said. Then it became more. And for over a year, they had been living in the same flat. 3 years. While I waited for the documents to be sorted and for the right moment to return, he had been with another woman for 3 years. 3 years building a parallel life. 3 years lying to me with a composure that, when I think about it, seems almost impossible to understand. Because it wasn't that he simply stopped calling or grew distant. He kept calling. He kept asking about the children. He kept sending money, which was what gave everyone the image of a good husband and a good father who was away out of necessity. He had constructed a perfectly sustainable story. The devoted man working hard abroad for his family. And that story protected me, but it also protected him. Nobody suspects a man who sends money home. When I finally called him to talk, it was a Tuesday night. The children were asleep. I was sitting in the same kitchen chair where I had stared at the wall that first night. I had the phone in my hand, and my heart was racing. Not exactly from fear, but from that strange thing the body feels when it knows what's coming will change everything. He answered on the second ring. He sounded normal. Annika, hi. I'm glad you called. I tried to reach you yesterday. I let him finish the sentence. And then I said his name. Just his name. Rohan. And in the silence that followed, before he said anything else, I knew he knew why I was calling. I knew that somewhere inside him he had been waiting for this call for a long time, that perhaps he even feared it, that perhaps in some twisted way he also needed it. I asked him directly, "Who is Meera Kapoor?" Silence. Not the silence of confusion, of someone who doesn't understand the question, the silence of someone calculating what to say, and in that silence of 3, 4, 5 seconds, the 5 years I had waited collapsed into something that has no precise name. It wasn't just sadness. It wasn't just anger. It was something closer to suddenly understanding that the life I thought I was living had never existed the way I believed it did. That I had been waiting for a man who was not coming back because he had already decided he was not coming back, and that I had been the last to know. What Rohan said after that silence was this: Annika, I need you to understand that things changed, that I changed, that it wasn't something I planned. That was all. There was no denial. No, I don't know what you're talking about, or you're confused, or any of the additional lies I had sometimes imagined in that moment. Only those words. As if 5 years of deception could be summed up in 3 short sentences, and that would be sufficient explanation. I was silent for a few seconds. Then I asked him since when. He said for nearly 3 years. He said it in a low voice, without drama, like someone confessing something that is no longer worth hiding. And somewhere inside me, the calmness with which he said it hurt me more than the information itself, because it meant he had had time to process all of it, that for him it was not a crisis. It was simply the reality he had decided was his reality, and I was only just finding out. 3 years. I asked if he was living with her. He said yes. I asked if he intended to return. There was another silence, and then he said, "I don't think that makes sense, Annika." I hung up. I said nothing more. I didn't shout. I didn't cry at that moment. I simply put the phone on the table and sat in the darkness of the kitchen for a time I cannot measure. It could have been 20 minutes. It could have been an hour. What I remember is that at some point I heard footsteps in the corridor. It was Priya, who sometimes woke in the middle of the night for no apparent reason, the way small children do. She appeared at the kitchen doorway with half-closed eyes and asked why I was still awake. I told her I had been thirsty, that I was going to sleep now. She looked at me for a moment longer, as if not entirely convinced, and then went back to her room. I waited for her to fall asleep, and then I cried. I cried in a way I don't remember having cried before, not with shouts or visible drama. I cried in silence, my face buried in my hands so as not to make a sound, because 2 children were sleeping, and Rohan's mother slept in the room next door, and I didn't want anyone to hear me. That detail strikes me as significant now. Even in the most painful moment of my life, I was worried about not disturbing anyone. That says a great deal about how I lived in that house. The next day, I got up at the usual time. I made breakfast. I combed Priya's hair. I reminded Arjun that he had a maths exam. I took them to school. I came back to the house. I helped my mother-in-law tidy the kitchen. Everything the same as always. I said nothing to my mother-in-law that day. Not that day, nor in the days that followed. I didn't know how to begin. I didn't know what words to use. And also, somewhere I find hard to admit, I was afraid of what she might already know, because I had begun to wonder if she already knew something. Whether some of those comments of hers I had heard over the years had a different explanation than the one I had given them. Whether when she said, "I hope Rohan finds there what he couldn't find here," she was talking about ambition or something else. I didn't want to know the answer to that yet. Rohan called 2 days later. I answered. He spoke in a voice different from his usual one, more serious, more careful. He said he wanted to talk calmly, that there were things we needed to resolve, that he would continue sending money for the children. That wasn't going to change, that we needed to think about how to handle the situation in a mature and responsible way. Mature and responsible. As if what he had done for 3 years was the behavior of someone mature and responsible. I didn't say that. I just listened. He told me that Mira knew about me, that she knew he was married, that she had accepted the situation because he had explained to her that our marriage was no longer real in practice, that they had talked about getting married eventually if things worked out. Getting married, with papers and everything. He wanted to marry her, which meant that at some point he would have to divorce me. He didn't say that directly that time, but it was implicit in everything he said. I listened to it and understood it. We hung up without resolving anything. That week was the hardest of my life, and the competition was stiff because the 5 previous years hadn't been easy either. But that week was different because there was nothing left to wait for. There was no more soon or any day now. There was only an ugly concrete reality I had to begin to digest. I went to see my mother on a Thursday afternoon. I told her I needed to speak with her alone. We sat in her room and I told her everything. I told her about Deepa, about Mira, about the call, about what Rohan had said. My mother listened in silence. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she took my hands and said, "Annika, you already knew. Somewhere inside you, you already knew." I didn't respond because I didn't know what to say, but she was right. Somewhere deep inside, I had known for a long time that something was wrong. I had known and chosen not to know, because not knowing was easier than facing what knowing would mean. My mother told me I had to make decisions, that I couldn't stay in my mother-in-law's house indefinitely in these circumstances, that I needed to speak with a lawyer, that she and Papa would support me. The words were right. The support was real. But at that moment, I wasn't thinking about lawyers or practical decisions. I was thinking about Arjun and Priya. I was thinking about how I was going to explain this to them. Arjun was 8 years old enough to not understand nothing, but not old enough to process the full truth. Priya was 6. Neither of them remembered clearly what it was like to live with their father, because he had left when they were barely babies, but both of them missed him in their own ways. Arjun missed him with questions. Priya missed him with drawings she sent him by phone, and which he always said were beautiful. How do you tell an 8-year-old boy that his father is not coming back? How do you explain something you yourself have only just begun to understand? That was what kept me awake those nights. Not the anger, though the anger was there. Not the humiliation, though that was there too. It was that specific, terrible question. How do I protect my children from something that cannot not hurt? At the end of that week, my mother-in-law came looking for me. I don't know whether someone had told her something, or whether she simply sensed it. Mothers sense things, even when they pretend not to. She found me sitting in the courtyard that afternoon, and sat down beside me without saying anything first. Then she asked, in a low voice, whether I had spoken with Rohan. I said yes. She asked whether he had told me everything, and that question confirmed what I had begun to suspect. She knew. Not everything, perhaps. Not the details. But she knew something was going on. She had known for some time and had chosen to say nothing to me. I didn't blame her in that moment. I don't blame her now. He was her son. Mothers protect their children even when their children do things that don't deserve protection. I understand that. But it also meant that I had lived in that house, under that roof, raising her grandchildren, while she had kept silent about something that directly affected me. That did hurt. I answered that yes, Rohan had told me, and that I was trying to decide what to do. She nodded. She didn't apologize. She didn't say anything more in that moment. She simply nodded and went back inside the house. I sat alone in the courtyard, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something different from sadness or anger. I felt a strange kind of clarity, like when the sky clears after days of clouds, and you can see things with a contrast that didn't exist before. I saw my life with that contrast for the first time. I saw that I had spent 5 years waiting for something that was never going to come. That I had spent enormous energy holding up an image, defending a man who did not defend me, explaining to the world a situation I didn't fully understand myself. That I had raised 2 children practically alone while pretending I wasn't. That I had lived in someone else's house, feeling like I was passing through, without complaining because complaining would have been ungrateful. And I saw that this had to end. I didn't know how. I didn't know exactly when. I didn't know what shape my life would take after all of this. But I knew, sitting in that courtyard in Delhi, that what had been could no longer continue, that I had to begin to build something that was mine. I made the decision to leave my mother-in-law's house on a Monday morning. It wasn't a dramatic moment. There was no fight, no scene. It was something much quieter than that. I got up as always, made breakfast as always, and while I watched Arjun and Priya eat with that calm concentration children have when they are hungry, I knew with a clarity I hadn't felt in a long time that I had to leave. That staying was continuing to live inside a story that was no longer true. I spoke with my parents that same week. I told them I needed a place to stay with the children while things were sorted out. My mother didn't hesitate for a second. She said yes before I had finished the sentence. My father did too, though he spoke less and hugged more. That is his way of saying the important things. I told my mother-in-law I was leaving. It was a short conversation. She didn't protest. I think somewhere she knew it was the right thing, even if she never said so in those words. She only helped me pack some of the children's things, and when we left, she gave me a hug that lasted longer than I expected. I don't know exactly what that hug meant, but I kept it with me. Rohan and I had several calls in the weeks that followed. None of them were easy. He kept talking about resolving things in a civilized way, and I kept not quite knowing what that meant in practice. We spoke about the children, about money, about documents. He said several times that he wanted to remain a good father, even though things between us had changed. I listened to those words and thought that being a good father also meant having been present during the last 5 years, and that part could not be recovered. I didn't say that. I had no energy for those conversations. What I did tell him, in one of those calls, was that I wanted a divorce, not as an attack, not with anger in my voice. I said it the way you say something that is already a fact, calmly, clearly, with no room for interpretation. He took a few seconds to reply, and then said he understood, that it was the most sensible thing. The most sensible thing. 5 years of my life, 2 children, a weight that had cost me more than I am capable of calculating. And the conclusion was that the most sensible thing was to dissolve all of that with a phone call and a legal procedure. I hung up and didn't cry. I had cried enough. At some point between that first night in the kitchen and that moment, something in me had dried up. Not in a bad way, but the way clothes dry after a heavy rain. You're still there, but you no longer weigh the same. The divorce process took time. These things are not fast in India. There were papers, dates, conversations with lawyers, moments when I had to read documents that summarized my marriage in cold legal terms, and that felt strange in a way that's hard to describe. Like looking at a photograph of something that was once yours and no longer recognizing yourself in it. Throughout all of that, the hardest part was the children. Arjun took it worse than I expected, though in hindsight, it shouldn't have surprised me. He was 8 when we began the process, and 10 when it was finished. In those 2 years, I watched him change in ways that broke my heart. He became quieter. He asked fewer questions, but when he did ask, they were more direct and harder to answer. One afternoon, he asked me if his father had left us because we weren't enough. I had to breathe deeply before answering that. I told him no. I told him that the decisions of adults have nothing to do with whether their children are enough or not, that he and his sister were the best thing that existed and that didn't change with any adult's decision. That his father loved him, I knew that, but that sometimes adults do things that cause harm even without meaning to. I don't know if it was the right answer. There is no manual for those conversations. You do what you can with what you have in that moment. Priya processed things differently, the way small girls do when they don't yet have all the words for what they feel. There were weeks when she had tantrums over small things, and I knew the tantrums were not about what they appeared to be. There were nights when she wanted to sleep in my bed, and I let her, even though we were both cramped, because I understood that what she needed was to feel I was close. Those nights, I lay awake listening to her breathe and thought that if anything made it worth the effort to keep going, it was this, that calm breathing of a sleeping child who trusted the world was still safe because I was there. That held me together many times. I started working 6 months after leaving my mother-in-law's house. I found a job in an administrative office, not exactly what I had studied, but it was stable work with fixed hours, and that was what I needed at that point. At first, it was difficult to organize things with the children, with my parents who helped, but also had their own lives, with expenses that were suddenly entirely my responsibility, even though Rohan sent something monthly. But there was something in getting up each morning and going to work that made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time, that I was a whole person, not just half of something that no longer existed. That may sound small, but for me, it was enormous. There were difficult moments I didn't expect, things that reached me in ways that made no sense. Once I saw on social media, without looking for it, a photo of Rohan and Meera at what appeared to be a celebration. They were smiling. He looked well. She looked well. And I sat there with the phone in my hand, feeling something complicated. Not just sadness, not just anger, but a mixture of both, and also something closer to disbelief. That the life in that photo had been built on top of mine. That every smile in that photo had as its foundation 5 years of lies that I had carried without knowing. I blocked the profile and continued with my day. That too was progress, even if it doesn't look like it. With time, things settled. Not all at once. Not in a cinematic way. With one exact moment where everything improves and you can say, this is where the good part began. That's not how real life works. It was more of a slow process, days that were a little lighter than the ones before, weeks that felt less like surviving and more like living, small moments accumulating without me noticing, until one day I looked back and saw how far I had come. Arjun began to talk more again with time. He started asking questions again, but different questions, those of a curious child rather than a frightened one. Priya went back to her drawings and began to draw happier things. Animals, landscapes, her classroom. One day she drew me. I had long hair and big eyes and I was smiling. Below, in her unsteady letters, she had written, "My mummy is brave." I burst into tears at that moment. The good kind, the kind that bring relief. I still keep that drawing in my room. If there is something I learned from all of this, and I don't say this to teach anyone a lesson because I don't think that's my place, it is that one can spend a great deal of time waiting for something external to change so that your life can change, waiting for the other person to return, for the situation to improve, for the circumstances to be right. And sometimes that waiting makes sense, and sometimes it is the slowest and most painful way of not living. I waited 5 years. I don't say it was a mistake to wait, because at the time it was what I could do with what I knew. But I do say that the day I stopped waiting was the day I began to truly live. Not a perfect life, not a life without complications, but a life that was mine, with my decisions, my mistakes, my children, my parents, my work, my good days, and my bad days. A life that did not depend on someone coming back in order to have meaning. Sometimes Arjun speaks with his father by video. Rohan calls regularly. That much should be acknowledged. The children have a relationship with him that I don't interfere with, because it is not my place, and because they have a right to their own bond with their father regardless of what happened between him and me. It is not easy to watch those calls, but it is not as hard as it used to be. It is simply a part of the new life. I don't know what will happen with Rohan and Mira. I don't care in the way I once would have. What I care about is here, in this small flat that is finally mine, with the children's school bags hanging by the door, with the smell of food I make myself, with the sound of Arjun playing in his room and Priya singing something in the bathroom that makes no sense but that I love to hear. That is what remained after everything broke, and it is more than I thought would remain. I am 32 years old, and I feel, for the first time in a long time, that the time ahead is mine. Vid ik sonet 4. 6. Baixo Claude é uma IA e pode cometer erros. Por favor, verifique as respostas.